In today's video, I'm going to be doing a foam cannon comparison using 7 high-end foam cannons. So if you are in the market for a new one, hopefully this will help you decide. So the ones that I'm going to be comparing today are the MJJC Pro V2, MJJC Pro V3, and the MJJC SV3. I've also got the MTM PF22.3, the active foam cannon, as well as the Carscope Foamzooka Pro, and the Carbon Collective HD foam cannon. So first things first, I'm going to jump into some foam tests. Now I'm not using the MJJC Pro V2 or SV3 here. The reason being is that I did a comparison quite recently on the second channel with the new Pro V3 and the performance for me was exactly the same with all three. So for ease I'm just going to use that one as a point of reference here. So for the first test here I went with DIY Detail Incredible Suds at a roughly 1:20 dilution. This produces a very thick foam even at this dilution, so will help to show the kind of maximum capability of these foam cannons. Now from my testing, I thought there wasn't a huge difference in terms of the foam production between all 5 of them, and when I monitored it over the course of several minutes, they all also seemed to dwell for a very similar amount of time. There were a few points where it started to break away on the panel just kind of due to the angle of it, but generally I don't think there was a massive difference between any of them here. So the next test I went on the opposite end of the spectrum and went for quite a thin snow foam, and this is the Garage Therapy one, and it's version 2, and I again mixed this up at a roughly 1:20 dilution. Again there were a few subtle differences between how the foam looked on the panels, and they all seemed to dwell for a similar amount of time, apart from the MJJC Pro V3, which seemed to drop off the panel a little bit faster. That was applied first, but even when measured over a similar period of time to the others, I do think it slipped off a bit quicker. Seems to be the Carscope one which produced a little bit thicker foam, which also seemed to stick on there for a bit longer compared to the rest of them in this instance. Now in this next test I wanted to measure how quickly the foam cannon bottles actually drained, as that's going to affect the concentration of the foam that's actually hitting the panel. A foam cannon that draws up that solution faster is going to produce a more concentrated foam on that panel, but of course is going to need filling up more often. So I'm going to show each of the 5 foam cannons here in order from what I would class as the thickest and driest foams to the more kind of runnier foams later on. Starting off with the MJJC, which I think produced the thickest and driest foam. Now the foam that I'm using here is Geon foam at a 1:15 dilution. I mix that up and then put exactly 220ml in each of these foam cannons and measure the time that it took for them to fully empty. The Carscope was, I'd say, the next thickest and driest foam and pretty comparable to the MJJC, but did actually drain slightly faster at 28 seconds. Following this, the Carbon Collective and active foam cannons were very similar, and interestingly also drained at that 27-second mark, so very comparable to the previous 2. I'd say these foams were a touch wetter kind of looking. Some people are going to prefer that kind of shaving cream foam, however a lot of people don't like that either. I like something in between, so this is a pretty good foam consistency for me. The MTM PF22 produced what I would say is the wettest foam, but still quite comparable to the previous two. Interestingly though, that took a lot longer to drain at 40 seconds, so although the foam was thinner, it's actually using quite a bit less product, and that is mostly the reason for it. Now I did consider doing an additional test where I mixed up the same panel impact ratio of all the foams. However, this video was getting a little bit too long already, and I know most people are just going to chuck a set dilution in the bottle and get going, so I didn't want to overcomplicate things too much. If however you do want that kind of video with maybe 2 or 3 of these foam cannons, then please let me know in the comments, as it's something I can add to the list for my second channel. So now I wanted to take a look at the different features and designs of all these foam cannons, as they all do vary quite a bit and have different advantages. So I'm going to start off with the head unit and look at the nozzles and adjustability. So all of these foam cannons, except for the Carbon Collective one, have both horizontal and vertical fan adjustment. So you can rotate that 360 degrees to get any kind of spray pattern you want. On all 7 of the foam cannons, you do get fan width adjustment. So you can go from a wide fan to a more narrow jet. You do that by rotating that front part on the nozzle. And it does feel a little bit different on all of them, so I'll take you through them very quickly. On the MJJC Pro V2, it is quite a stiff adjustment. So if you do want to adjust that fan width, you are going to have to hold that foam cannon at the red part and then adjust that black part. Otherwise, if you just rotate the black part without holding that red section, it's just going to adjust between that vertical and horizontal pattern. The next stiffest after that is the Carscope one. On the MTM, the MJJC Pro V3, MJJC SV3 and the active foam ones, that front section is pretty loose, so you can easily adjust it on the fly. However, if you do pick it up by that section, you're very likely to knock whatever position you're in out of place. Obviously with the Carbon Collective one, you don't get that horizontal and vertical adjustment, and the fan width adjustment is still fairly loose and pretty comparable to the 4 that I just mentioned. Another quick thing to note before moving on is that on both the active and the MTM, it does have a nice clicking function when you are adjusting between the horizontal and vertical patterns, which is a nice little feature that does just feel a little bit more premium. All the foam cannons, apart from the Carbon Collective one, have that traditional dial on the top, which allows you to adjust how thick the foam is by affecting how quickly it's drawing up solution from the bottle. On the MTM, it again has that nice little clicking feature that the rest of them don't have. On the Carbon Collective one, this one looks quite a bit different. It doesn't have a dial on the top, but instead has a slider on the side, which is numbered 1 to 8 and again allows you to adjust the foam thickness. I'll jump into some clips now showing you the full range of foam thickness you can get with each of the dials on these. Now moving on to the bottle design, and all of these do have wide necks, although some are definitely wider than others. I try to measure the openings on them all as accurately as possible, just using a ruler, so there might be a mil or 2 of variation. However, the MTM was by far the widest at approximately 60mm, followed by the Carscope at 55mm. It then gets very close as the active was about 49mm, and both the MJJC Pro V2 and the Carbon Collective ones were about 48mm. Then the MJJC Pro V3 came in at around 43mm, and the MJJC SV3 was the narrowest at 39mm. Another feature to compare is how the head units actually attach to the bottle. On the active foam ones, the Carbon Collective one, and the MJJC Pro V2, they all have a threaded connection, whereas on the other foam lances, the head units attach to the bottle in a slightly different way, which makes it a touch quicker. I think both the MJJC Pro V3 and SV3 have the nicest connection, as these have a quarter turn that kind of seat themselves quite nicely and feel very secure when they're actually on there, but are nice and quick to take the head unit on and off. The Carscope again has that kind of quarter turn which does seat itself and kind of click into place. However, it's a little bit looser than the MJJC ones, so on one occasion I did accidentally knock the head unit off when I was using it, so it doesn't feel quite as secure in place. The MTM PF22.3 has the shortest connection but feels the most clunky. It has plastic tabs on the neck of the bottle which match up with the head unit, but particularly when you first buy these, there is some kind of excess plastic which makes it very hard to get it on and off. Once you've had it a little while, it's not as much of an issue, but it just doesn't feel as nice as the others to use. 3 of these foam cannons have leak-proof lids, which are the active one, the MJJC Pro V3 and the MJJC Pro V2. The rest of the foam cannons will dribble out the top if you do tip them upside down. The only other thing to quickly mention on this section is that both the Carscope foam cannon and the MJJC Pro V3 also have a 28mm thread in the head unit, so you can attach a regular bottle onto them. The other foam cannons don't have that feature. Now moving on to the bottle designs a little bit more. All of them have measurements up to the 1000mm mark, except for the MJJC Pro V3, which has it up to the 1200mm mark. You also can overfill the MJJC foam cannons, as well as the Carscope and the Carbon Collective ones slightly, without going into the neck of the bottle. I'll also quickly take you through the bottles individually in a bit more detail. So on the MTM one, it has measurements for both ounces and millilitres, and they actually go up in 50ml increments, so it is nice and easy to accurately see what you're measuring out. On the active foam lance, it's pretty straightforward. You've got 100ml increments, which are all clearly labelled. This is also the case for the MJJC SV3. The Carbon Collective one also goes up in 100ml increments, but these just start at the 200ml level. The MJJC Pro V2 also goes up in those 100ml increments, but they're only labelled at the 1000 and the 500ml mark, so a little bit harder to see than the others. The MJJC Pro V3 also follows a similar design, with those 100ml increments up to the 1000ml mark, only labelled at the 100, 500 and 1000ml mark, and then weirdly it goes to 1080ml and then up to 1200ml. The Carscope Foamzooka is the least clear of them all and the hardest to measure out, as it just goes up in 200ml increments. Now onto the bottle material, as that affects how likely they are to break if you do unfortunately happen to drop them. The Carscope Foamzooka, MJJC Pro V2 and the MTM PF 22.3 all have HDPE bottles, which are the most durable type and are most likely to survive a drop. The MJJC Pro V2 and the Carscope one feel very solid, and there's no give when you try and squeeze them. There is a little bit with the MTM, although I don't think that's a disadvantage, as it does feel nice and sturdy, and potentially that could even help it absorb a drop. The MJJC Pro V3 is the only one that has a polypropylene or PP bottle, which does have a tiny bit of give to it if you really do give it a squeeze. In terms of the shock absorption between this and the HDPE bottles, the best person to go and watch is Cars with Keeve, who does a lot of drop tests, so you can see the difference there. But generally, this bottle is not quite as durable as the HDPE ones, but it is more durable than the PET bottles, which are the clear plastic. And the ones in this category are the Active Foam Lance, the Carbon Collective one, and the MJJC SV3. The clear plastic makes it really easy to see what's inside the bottle and measure out your solution, but it is the most likely to break if you do happen to drop it. In terms of the bottle shapes and size, which obviously affects the stability and also how easy they are to pick up, the MJJC SV3 is the least stable, with it having the tallest design and the narrowest base. It still does feel relatively stable, but when empty it can be a bit top heavy and has occasionally toppled on me. I haven't had that issue with any of the other 6, and although they are slightly different shapes, they all do feel nice and stable. The MJJC Pro V2 is probably the hardest bottle to pick up, just with it being quite wide and not really having any cutouts on it. The Carbon Collective one has a hex design, so although very wide and a bit hard to pick up with my hands, for most people it's probably not going to be a problem. The Carscope one has a rounded design but does have slight indents again to make it a bit easier to hold. The MTM has a bit of a contour design, which again is very easy to pick up despite having a pretty wide design. Similar to the MJJC Pro V3, which again has that wide bottle but does have a couple of contours on the side, making it easy to grab. But I'd say probably the most thought out bottle is the Active one, which has the tripod design, which makes it super stable and also really nice and easy to pick up too. Moving on to the pickup pipes, the MTM is the only one that doesn't have a weighted ball on the end, making it easier to collect solution when the bottle is relatively empty. The pickup pipe is also the stiffest of them all, so it is a touch harder to pull out the remaining solution from the bottle if you are draining it till it's completely empty, but it's not a massive issue from my experience. Apart from the Active Foam Cannon, all the pickup pipes do have a mesh screen on them to filter anything that might be in the bottle. The pickup pipes on all the MJJCs, the Active and the MTM all look like they're cut to the perfect length. I do think the Carbon Collective and the Carscope one could do with being a touch shorter, as they do bend a touch more than the others when they're touching the bottom of the bottle, but in a practical sense I've not noticed any issues with them. In terms of the build quality, I do think all of them are good options. Obviously I have mentioned the differences on the bottle type, so if you are prone to dropping your foam cannon, then that is something to consider. In terms of the rest of the design though, they all do feel well made. I've had a couple of O-rings split here and there, but that's just general wear and tear. There are some differences in terms of the materials used in each of the foam cannons. So both the MJJC Pro V2 and the SV3 have brass constructions, which are nice and hard wearing but do tend to look a little bit tarnished after a while. This hasn't affected the performance from my experience, but they just don't look as pretty as the others after they've been used for a while. The MTM has a nickel-plated brass head, which has the benefit of not having that kind of tarnishing after a while, and the Carbon Collective one has an aluminium head, which has the added benefit of being really nice and lightweight. It actually comes in at about 314 grams, which is significantly lighter than the rest of the foam cannons, which measure between 600 and 669 grams. Both the active foam cannon and the Carscope Foamzooka have a full stainless steel head unit construction, and the MJJC SV3 has mostly stainless steel, but there are a couple of brass elements, such as where the gun adapter fits in, and also the orifice as well. The only other thing I wanted to note in terms of build quality is that I do like what the MTM PF22 has, which is reinforcement just using some plastic pieces around the fan at the front. With the MJJC Pro V2, I did actually bend those fan blades at the front once, which was probably due to me just cranking it without really looking, but this isn't something you really would be able to do with the MTM one due to that reinforcement, and something that the rest of the foam cannons don't feature. Now I also wanted to touch on the spare parts that some of these do come with. So starting with the ones that don't come with anything, these are the Carbon Collective one, the Carscope one, and the MTM PF22. The MJJC Pro V2 and SV3 do come with another 1.1mm orifice, and it's just the Pro V3 now that comes with a spare filter and some extra O-rings too. In addition to coming with that 1.1mm orifice as a spare, it also comes with a 1.35 as a spare too. Finally, the active foam lance comes with a lot of spare parts, including several O-rings for the different parts, in addition to a 1.1mm, 1.35 and 1.45 orifice. Sadly though, it doesn't come with a spare filter. Now I also did want to mention price, and obviously these are subject to change depending on when you're watching the video, and I do have some discount codes in the description which can bring these down from anywhere between 5 and 10% depending on where you purchase them from, but I'm just going to go with the standard prices that I'm seeing with the UK at the moment for comparison. So the active foam cannon is the most expensive, coming in at £84.95, followed closely by the MJJC Pro V3 at £79.95. The Carscope one comes in at £70, followed by the MTM, which comes in at £57.95. The MJJC SV3 is a bit cheaper, £49.95, followed by the Pro V2, which is £46.95, and then the cheapest on the list is the Carbon Collective at £44.99. As I said, there's going to be links in the description to them all, as well as the relevant discount codes, so you can hopefully get a better deal on them. So I've tried to make this video as in-depth as possible and really cover as many features as possible on these foam cannons. However, I know it was a lot of information to throw at everyone, so I've put together this table which should hopefully help you visualise it a bit better, and you can use it to figure out which features are important to you and which foam cannon is actually going to tick the boxes. As I said, everything I've used in this video is going to be linked in the description. If you have found this video helpful, then it'd be brilliant if you could drop it a like, and thanks very much for watching.